Welcome everybody back to another edition of the Tech Woke Podcast. I'm your host, Chris. In today's podcast, we have a good treat today. The reason why I say it's a good treat because we have somebody to come on here and talk about CMMC compliance. As we know, there's a lot going on in the CMMC space. People don't understand what it is. People don't understand the implementation. So in today's podcast, we brought on somebody that knows this topic very, very well. His name is Carter Schoenberg. He's a CCA, he's a CCP, has his his CSSP, and he also is a vice president of assessment and compliance. And without further ado, Carter, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, Christopher. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So we're gonna just go straight into it. First off, Carter, for those that don't know who you are, just kind of give you a brief statement about who you are and what do you do? Just tell the audience who you are.
Sure. So been in the cyberspace now for about 26 years, pivoted over from a local law enforcement background, have worked for varying roles throughout the progression of my career, from starting in a SOC, learning from some of the best and the brightest with the legacy ISS X-Force, and being able to help stand up the IT Information Sharing and Analysis Center through supporting Homeland Security at their Cyber Crime Center, Motorola, a variety of different government contractors, and also even at one point had stood up my own company, which by happenstance was designed to accomplish the very same support mechanisms as what we are now know as CMMC.
Yeah, congratulations too. I didn't know you was an officer. So you went from an officer to getting into cyber. That's a whole different topic at its own. But shout out to you for making that transition. A lot of people try to make that transition and don't do it, but you was able to do it. And not only that, you started your own company. You supported various government contracting companies. So hey, shout outs to you, brother.
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the first thing I'm going to address today, we both work in the cyberspace. We talk about different topics like CMMC. We talk about the cyber maturity model, CUI, things like that. But to the audience that's listening that don't have an idea what it is, or in some instances, companies don't know what it is. They just like, okay, we just got to get CMMC compliant. But can you explain what it is, and does having CMMC compliancy apply to everybody? Do you think every company need to get it, or just certain types of companies?
Yeah, all great questions. And for context, so the whole topic of CMMC started in, I believe, right around December of 2019. This company that I made reference to, I literally closed the doors in October of 2019. So timing, I guess it was just a little bit ahead of the curve in that particular point. But the reason why ultimately I elected to shut the business down was chasing single point in time engagements for a contractual requirement that wasn't getting policed was just very problematic, because industry basically looked at this as another government requirement that they're never going to police, and they didn't police it. So as a result, we are now in a third-party validation and verification mode. So especially with respect to a memo that came out from the Department of War's Office of the Chief Information Officer about a month ago, there's been a lot of confusion with regards to industry conflating a couple of things here. So first, when we're talking about CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, while it is a certification regime, it doesn't change the fact that what the organization is being certified against is what's known as a Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, otherwise DFARS clause. This specific DFARS clause pertains to, if you have this clause in your contract, then by default, you are on the hook for having the right safeguards in place to adequately protect and safeguard controlled unclassified information. Now, that in and of itself has proven to be problematic, because so many times government contracting officials just take the position of, well, I put the DFARS clause in. Yep, I'm good. I'm covered from my side. And unfortunately, in many cases, overmarking the requirements, because I will liken it to something that I experienced firsthand when I was with Homeland Security. Had a top secret security clearance, went through all the bells and whistles, and I asked at that point in time, the Chief Information Security Officer for ICE, why? He goes, well, what do you mean why? I have a TS and I haven't been read in on one classified briefing. So what difference does this make? And he was like, yeah, that's a fair point. Start reading them in. So with regards to how the government has just taken this broad stroke approach of, well, we're just going to make it CUI, define it as CUI. And as a result, we're going to overshoot the goalposts, and therefore you have potentially unnecessary requirements that are going to be applicable to the majority of the defense industrial base, which spans about roughly 300,000 companies. And what is CUI? So CUI is a level of data categorization that either by law, regulation, or other internal rule requires additional safeguards to protect. National Archives and Records Administration, they are the body of authority on this matter. A subset of what NARA has defined Department of Defense, now Department of War, it came up with their own list of what they're going to qualify as CUI. And the expectation is if any of these particular data category types are going to be assumed to be within the scope of the contract, then by default, that organization is going to have to be in conformance with what is known as CMMC level 2. So there's a total of three levels. The first level applies to what's called FCI, Federal Contract Information. So if you think, yay, I just won, so I got a federal contract, all right? So you have contracting officials' names and the scope of the requirements and the pricing and all that. So that's FCI, Federal Contract Information. And there's a FAR clause, Federal Acquisition Regulation clause, that requires some level of protection. And then you have what's called CUI, which is basically going to be a higher level of obligation for being able to ensure that if you are receiving this type of data, that you have all of the security controls and their associated objectives with a NIST special publication numbered 800-171, which is titled Protecting Controlled and Classified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations. Those last two words, I would actually argue, Chris, are the most important part, and organizations. And the reason why? So for many, many years, the government has always relied heavily upon industry to be able to provide them advancements in technology. So the way it used to work is, hey, I got this device. All right, I like that device. I'm very impressed with it. But before I plug it into my network, I need to have it independently validated, and that's called AATO, an authorization to operate. And there's two different models for that. You have a type ATO, and then you have a site ATO. A type ATO basically means they're coming to the actual product facility for Apple, or whether it's Motorola or Fortinet or whatever the case may be. And they're doing their own independent testing, and it has like a site accreditation. A type accreditation. And then once it gets plugged into their infrastructure, then it has to go through yet another battery of evaluations, and therefore it has a site accreditation that's usually issued by what's called the AO, the authorization official, that is usually a colonel or higher within the branches of service of the military. And there are corresponding representatives in federal civilian, which is usually a GS-15 or senior executive service. So with respect to the topic on CUI, there is a challenge with overmarking, and that's for sure. And I made reference to contracts being defined as FCI. We are already seeing contracts being marked CUI. So by default, the moment that they're getting that, the assumption is, well, you're on the hook. It's within the four corners of your contract. This defarce clause is in there, and now you had to take action. Action that began in 2019 is now been going on for closing in on 7 years. There were two federal regulations that became codified. One was called 32 CFR Part 170. That basically put into federal regulation that CMMC as a government-wide program it's authorized. Then you had to have the follow-up requirement, which basically dictated to the Department of Defense, NASA, and I think one other organization that you are now going to be obligated, if you have an anticipated CUI requirement, to actually put this into contracts. And they were going to do, and that was called 48 CFR. So you had 32 that took place in December of 2024, and then you had 48 that took place in 2025. And they began rolling that out. And as a result of that particular rollout, there was going to be in a multi-year phased. So in the first year, they were going to do what only evaluations for level 1, meaning that we were going to have solicitations hit the street that only had a level 1 requirement in there. And then in some circumstances, they may have had a level 2, but you could self-certify in that capacity. And then phase 2 was supposed to start on November 10th of this year in 2026. And then that would have been the trigger to notify contracting officers and officials, you now have to put this requirement in for an independent certification if it met the minimum threshold to meet that requirement. So you would still have like level 1s, level 2 self certifications, and then these third-party certifications. And the Department of War then came out with this memo basically saying we are going to hit the brakes on the requirement for this phase 2 rollout to require contracting officers and officials to put a level 2 independent certification requirement into their particular contracts. In any pre-existing solicitations that were recently awarded, I think within 12 months of the date of issue being grandfathered, those requirements were also removed, which caused a lot of challenges in industry, because you had organizations that went through a lot of effort to become certified, so that way they can go and win these opportunities or have preferential treatment. And now they're kind of back to an even playing field with organizations that still have the same contractual obligations, but don't have to necessarily prove it through a third party.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I agree. I saw that post recently. I'm like, so I know organizations that go through spend a lot of money. Some people are spending 50 to sometimes even $100,000. You got to implement it. A lot of people get these licenses Intune, and when I first seen it, I was like, y'all just taking it away. But when people taking it away, they're doing it right now because they need to figure out what they need to do. Whether they saying they don't have enough assessors, that's one thing they're saying, but. From what's going on right now, do you think people should continue to keep doing CMMC assessments?
So there were two main arguments that were being socialized by the government, some by Small Business Administration, some by the Department of War's OCIO, we came to learn was offered up by SBA. So the two issues were, one, cost of CMMC is too expensive, and two, there is not enough in the CMMC ecosystem to scale to the demand. So as a result of my spheres of influence, I've been engaged in a number of working groups that have been in direct communications with Ms. Davies, the CIO for the Department of War. I am very much of the opinion more than enough overwhelming data points have been provided to her to show that with respect to the scalability, it's not an issue of scalability. It's just that industry has continued to wait, and as a result, they have not taken any action, and they were hoping on this for a last Hail Mary ditch effort to potentially see, do they not have to be in conformance with this requirement? With respect to costs, some of the numbers that were being shown were around, like, I think $600,000 or something pretty high. Now, the challenge with that is, one, that particular data point was a one-off, and it had nothing to do with CMMC certification. It had to do with implementation costs. So the organization that I represent, Cognac Cyber, we are an authorized C3PAO through its acquisition of Soundwave Consulting. And on average, if we had to come on site, that's usually around the high 40s. And if it's allowing us to do it all remote, it's in the low 40s. Now, there might be some outliers to that. If you have a very large infrastructure for, let's say, a college or university as an example. There might be some exceptions to that, but to say hundreds of thousands of dollars, yeah, I'm sure those do exist, but you're usually talking about like the Raytheons, the Northrop Grummons, the General Dynamics, things along those lines. For the small and medium business sector, I don't have any data points that validate that assumption of, oh, the certification costs are too expensive. With respect to the implementation costs, yes, those are not for the faint of heart, and I am certainly empathetic to organizations having to take on any additional costs, especially when their mission is to try to help the United States government support the warfighter. However, to date, I have not seen any case study nor anybody that can show me a singular example of, if you have a mom and pop shop that make a widget and it's being sold for $1.13 per unit to the U.S. government, that as a result of these additional cybersecurity contractual obligations, that they would have to increase that widget from $1.13 to $1.37. And as a result of that increase, because of the contractual obligation, they lost on price competitiveness. Anybody that's listening, if you have a case study that you can share with me, I am all eyes and ears open. But I've been beating the ground for over 2 some odd years looking for some form of a testable data point to support that. And it just doesn't exist.
I respect that, and hey, listen to what Carter was saying. He's opening my eyes, especially with the cost, because that was the big thing I've heard. I've heard sometimes people paying hundreds of thousands, but he's saying, hey, people paying low 40s and they're supporting the U.S. government. CUI is important, and then that's why I asked you on that question on CUI. What is CUI? But it can be defined in different ways, from what I'm seeing. So I get what you're saying.
It can be, and also you have to take into consideration that, why are we at where we are right now? So this is probably not going to be a particularly favorable position for anybody listening to this, but the reality is this is an industry self-inflicted wound. I was present firsthand back in 2013, hearing people from the U.S. government saying, industry, you've got to do better. And industry was like, yeah. Years later, guys, we're hemorrhaging. You got to do better. Yeah. Guys, you better start doing better, or we're going to force your hand to do better. Yeah. 32 CFR drops. Oh my God. So, it's one of those things where it's an interesting debate on costs. So as an example, the majority of government contracts actually have a requirement for like $1 million in automobile insurance coverage for the employees. If they're not driving vehicles for the government, why is this even an issue? So you're okay with paying the exaggerated premiums for insurance, but you're not okay with ensuring that your information is not only secured from exfiltration, but also your operations can continue without missing a beat. And that's one of those other challenges that has existed with regards to the Department of War's perspective. They want to see much higher levels of resilience, and I can't fault them for that. But an example I'll provide you, Chris, is if Atlanta, Coca-Cola in Atlanta gets attacked and their bottling facility gets disrupted, they can probably say, okay, St. Louis, Tampa, ramp up production. If you have a small company in Tennessee that's making, let's say, 155 millimeter howitzer shells, and their system gets compromised and their entire manufacturing plant comes to a shutdown, a standstill, it's not like they can say, oh, we got a backup facility in Des Moines, Iowa, spin that up. It just doesn't work that way. So it's not just about protecting the data, it's ensuring the continuity of your operations to support the warfighter.
Yeah, and I agree, and I want to slowly start getting over to the actual implementation and how do companies start preparing? Because like you said, like we've been kicking the can for a long time. Everybody's shocked. They're like, oh, so we got to actually implement these things.
Right.
How would you suggest for a company to start preparing on the documentation and on implementation? How should they do that?
So the guidance I'll give anybody that's watching this session is the same that I've professed for a number of years. First off, any of your current contracts that you have in your possession, all you have to do is do a scan, Control F for -7012. If that hits, I hate to tell you, you're on the hook for it, right, wrong, or indifferent. If you are in GovWin or some other type of RFP CRM, where you're evaluating what kind of opportunities that you want to pursue, I'm not going to say it's proof positive, but you should be able to have a reasonable expectation based on the scope of work as described in the proposed solicitation that's going to come out, let's say in 2027. Because usually, very rarely are the things brand new. They're usually like recompetes for what have already been awarded. So you have an opportunity to see what was in the prior scope of work. You can probably reasonably articulate and understand what type of work products might fall within the scope of these additional safeguarding requirements. So first, what is the contract in question? 2, who are the individuals on your team that are going to be supporting that specific program? And then 3, what are the computing assets that are associated with those individuals supporting that program? That codifies basically your scope of what you will want to be able to have enhanced levels of protection for. So you may be a company of 100 individuals. The chances that all 100 have a legitimate business need to access CUI, pretty slim. Statistically speaking, out of a 100 employee company, I would guess on the low end 7 and on the high end 25. And that's probably a pretty generous swag that I just gave. So with regards to additional fees, whether you're using a third-party enclave like Prevail or Microsoft GCC or any type of authorized environment that's going to meet the minimum obligations for the DFARS, it's going to dramatically reduce your cost exposures versus saying, well, I'm just going to do all of it. Well, you can, but there's no real cost justification to do that. These are not inexpensive solutions that have to be implemented. And the other thing that I would offer is industry generally gets CMMC wrong. And what do I mean by that? They're looking at CMMC as it's an IT thing. Unfortunately, it is not an IT thing. It would be a lot simpler if you could just basically bucketize it in that capacity. But CMMC is a cybersecurity programmatic implementation scheme. And if you are not looking at cybersecurity as a core business risk commensurate with fire, theft, or flood, and you only look at it, well, I'm good, my IT person told me so, then you're already setting yourself up for failure in that capacity. And I can't necessarily fault business owners for that misunderstanding. There's a variety of different reasons. Very, very few MBA programs even have cybersecurity as a risk model for what they would want to even evaluate as part of their risk organizational factors. But when you now are looking at not just cyber risk, but how does cyber risk trigger into systemic risk? And what do I mean by systemic risk? Meaning you've gone from ones and zeros to actually having a negative consequence on physical infrastructure, as I made reference to with manufacturing facilities and things along those lines.
Yeah, Carter, you said a lot. Like understanding your contract, number one. Number two, understanding who has in contact with CUI. And I know you understand this really well because that's one of the main questions that they ask. A lot of those questions: who has access to this? What's the CUI data flow? A lot of those questions can be answered just with that. How do you get access to it? And like you mentioned, GCC High, Intune. A lot of people use that because it helps with access controls. But the main thing that you say, like, you got to make sure that you're actually implementing this. I've been in organizations where they'll say something on documentation, but as an assessor, you come through, you actually sit down and you're going through a computer to make sure you're actually having it in place. So to any companies that's watching, make sure you listen to what Carter's saying, because this is the main thing if you want to kind of do it yourself. If you can do it yourself, or you can always hire somebody. So there's companies out here that can do it all for you, but just want to put that out there.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Chris. So Cognac Cyber, we have 3 lines of business. So we have a consulting line of business. We have a fully managed services offering. And then we have the certification side. And obviously, if we do one of the first two, we disqualify ourselves out from doing the certification element because it's a clear conflict of interest. But having said that, as a lead certified assessor, not just myself, but members of my team, and I hear it all the time throughout the ecosystem, what people think they need to have in their documentation versus what the assessor is actually going to be looking for, not necessarily the same thing, which is also one of the reasons why so many organizations struggle to get past that first hurdle to become CMMC certified. And what do I mean by that? Because there's actually a total of 4 internal phases for a CMMC assessment. Phase 1 is essentially, it's a data call. And phase 2 is what your viewers might consider as the, in-person audit, if you will. But phase 1 during that data call, I mean, to your point, yep, we need to see the data flow diagrams. We need to see your system security plan, policies and procedures, proof that you've tested your incident response plan. There is so much weight put on the operational and managerial components of this NIST doctrine that so many small and medium-sized business owners, they just struggle with significantly. So I agree with you 100%. Don't take your chance on thinking, well, my person's going to know it well enough. The evidence, unfortunately, just does not support that, which is why we've taken this approach, again, from the Soundway days, where when we provide recommendations to our clients, we're not just saying you did something wrong and you need to fix it. We're actually giving them contextualization with regards to what kind of options would that look like, what are the costs of ownership, and as a result of that, giving them enough information to make a decision based on attributable data that's business and risk justified. And from that, as long as our recommendations are adopted, to the best of my knowledge, we're still the only game in town that warranties our work products, which means that if our recommendations are adopted as prescribed, Chris, in the face of a negative finding from another C3PAO, Department of War, meaning DIBCAC, state attorney generals, we will come in and defend our client's position with our compliance team for up to 40 man hours at no additional charge.
That's great. Definitely, that's good to know. And also, too, I wanted to kind of get on some things that can help people in the long run. As an assessor, I know you deal with certain things. One of them is maybe people don't organize their documentation in a proper way through SharePoint or whatever. But I know that for a fact. But is there any other things that, if you're preparing to get assessed, how should you prepare? Like, what are some of the mistakes you've seen people make? Just kind of so I can know.
Yeah. So as part of our phase 1, what we have actually come to learn, part of our phase 1 is we would give them a spreadsheet that we call an artifact availability list. So we're basically asking them, do they have these things? It's a binary response. Yes, no. If the answer is yes, what's the naming convention of that particular document, PDF, spreadsheet, whatever. And then we use that as a way of being able to say, all right, you're telling us you have this. Now let's go into either your GRC tool or your SharePoint site or wherever you're storing this, where in a read-only capacity, we can come in and actually evaluate and say, yep, you're telling us you have 25 things. We see 25 things. We evaluated it. Looks like we're ready to go. But the mistakes that we've seen now on 2 occasions in just the past 60 days with clients that have been getting ready to become assessed is their ability to go to phase 2 has been suspended because based on our initial review, they just weren't even close to being ready. And as a result of that, we're applying that lesson learned from a process improvement standpoint to give that artifact availability list to our clients much more rapidly rather than waiting for that phase 1 trigger to actually take place. So that way they can make whatever course corrections are necessary. We see things such as documentation. I would say the big things that we see there are documents that are written in a way to the security control language versus the security control in its subordinate objectives. So as an example, the very first control, 311, it's an access control, but there are actually 6 things that have to be done. And if any of those things aren't done, then by default, that control is not met. So without having a line item by line item saying, okay, for Alpha, this is how the Acme company is doing this. For Bravo, this is how the Acme company is doing this. For Charlie, the Acme company is outsourcing this to the Delta company, and this is how they do it. So without having that level of depiction on clearly showing who's doing what, why they're doing it, and what's the authority of that individual to execute, it just becomes very, very problematic. I mean, we've seen system security plans that are 35 pages, and not that there's anything inherently saying a system security plan must be a minimum number of pages. But by default, if we're in phase one, we see a 35-page system security plan for something that has to cover 320 different things, something's amiss.
Yeah, and I agree. Like the organizations I work with, they literally alpha, beta, Charlie, line by line. We can read what's going on. In the government space, when we work on the ATOs, I'm gonna say we don't usually do it that way. I think we should adopt it that way, just making sure we're addressing each thing to make sure everything is compliant. But that's one thing that I've noticed too. Like systems that are compliant and are good with the documentation literally list everything line by line. Another thing I wanted to bring up too, when you go through an assessments, I know sometimes you have a mock assessment, sometimes you have a full assessment. When you're going through those assessments, sometimes you're able to put a poem, or you're able to fix it as you go. There's some controls that you can't do that for. Can you give some instance on how does that work, or if you have any examples, that would kind of help out, even for me in the future.
Sure. So out of 110 controls, as it stands as of today's date, August 25th, 2026, 58 of the 110, you're not allowed to have a poem on. Now, with respect to being able to fix, let's say, a minor deficiency, and even that in of itself, it causes some consternation within the CMMC ecosystem, because what 32 CFR says versus what the expectations of the accreditation body are, there's some kind of like interpretation. It's gray. No, it's dark gray. No, it's light gray. And sometimes that can be a little on the problematic side. So as an example, if you were to read 32 CFR, it basically says within so when you finish phase two, so once phase two is done and you kind of like have your baseline, okay, one of three things is going to happen. Hey, congratulations, everything is trending as met. You're awesome. Behind door number two, not everything was trending as met, but you met the minimum threshold to be able to have a conditional certificate of status, all of which is subject to a QA evaluation. And then behind door number three is, sorry, you didn't pass. But the challenge that's going to exist, and that we've seen on many, many occasions, is the interpretation. Because again, 32 CFR says going from trending to final, you have to have 10 business days for the QA to be able to evaluate. And within that 10 days, the organization seeking certification or assessment is allowed to provide additional information. Now, the devil's in the details. I very much of the opinion of what the Cyber AB's position is, where, yeah, but that's the assumption is based on like if the documentation might be missing or something like that. There's nothing with regards to you're missing something from a technical implementation standpoint, and then all of a sudden you're going to go fix that in 10 days. So there are some definite challenges there. We haven't seen something yet in doing this for a year and a half since assessments have been authorized, where a technical finding was so egregious that it required a not met rating. We've seen that time and time again with documentation, minor deficiencies, where they are allowed to resolve that. With regards to your statement, like fixing it on the fly, we don't necessarily allow them to fix it on the fly. But what we have seen time and time again is, let's say on Monday, we are evaluating access control and identification and authentication as an example. And I'm going to put Chris on the spot. All right, Chris, I need to see this piece of objective evidence. I know where it's at. I know exactly where it's at. I know exactly where it's at. Crap, it's not here.
He's not
All right.
here.
Well, at the end of that day, during that hot wash call, that particular control is going to be trending as not met. Now, let's say the next morning, Chris comes to me and says, "Hey, Carter, you know that thing? It was in the wrong file folder." Well, it happens. As long as the assessors, we can operate in good faith that, one, you just didn't whip it up, and two, it is adequate and sufficient to the control in question, then what will happen on that second day hot wash, not only all those controls would be evaluated, but you would see how we reverted the day one finding from not met to now trending as met. So that's usually where we're seeing the majority of them. And also as a result of an edict that came out of the accreditation body around February or March, OSCs now have the absolute right. If they're in the middle of an assessment and they see something they're like, going, we're going to get crucified on that. We're done. They can sit there and advise the C3PAO, time out. I want this one to be defined as a mock. And we have to honor that. I'm not here to defend that position, but that is the position within the ecosystem right now. So the benefit of the mock is you get to go through a live fire exercise of, I've seen some where they don't do all the controls. They look at the most challenging ones, but in my opinion, I am not in favor of that. I'm very much in favor of, if you're going to do a mock assessment, go through all 320, because why would you want to take a chance on thinking that you're in really, really good shape only to potentially get caught flat-footed on a one-pointer that you were convinced, yep, we got that one, but it wasn't evaluated first. So as a result, now you're going to get hammered by it. And also, when you're doing a mock assessment, how critically important it is to have the exact same of people that did the mock to do the actual formal assessment. One, there's already some institutional knowledge of the organization and the infrastructure. And two, you don't have to worry about two different people having different interpretations of the finding. So, it would be very hard for me to position myself to say, I know I told you that this wasn't right, and I know that we had a common understanding of what will it take to resolve it, and then I'm going to come back and evaluate it. You operate in good faith, and I'm like, I changed my mind. I was wrong the first time. I mean, those kinds of challenges just won't happen, but that's one of the benefits of ensuring that if you have the exact same team on the formal that did the mock, avoiding those potential downfalls.
Yeah, I just want to let you know, audience, if you're watching this, he's speaking nothing but bars. And be honest with you, you need to really pay attention, because that's a common mistake. People will go through the assessment, pick a whole different team, and things get arrayed. That's a bar on its own. So thank you, Carter, for that. Also, I did want to kind of adjust on another question. A lot of people like to use Intune. You mentioned a couple other ones you can use. Why do people use Intune so much? And do you recommend any other ones to use for like access controls and putting in an environment? What do you think?
So there's a variety of different tools that are out there. At the end of the day, my recommendation is this. Business needs reign supreme. Full stop. There are many solutions that are out there that allow you to do, let's say, vulnerability management or device configuration, baseline configurations, things along those lines. But why pay for an additional shiny object if those core capabilities are already within your accessibility? Time and time again, I mean, I've seen for decades where organizations are focusing so much of their cyber spend on the next shiny widget, and they haven't even come close to maximizing what they already have capital expenditure investment in. So I'm not saying that Microsoft is the end all be all, but if that's what you're having to use, at least explore what is in the arsenal of that acquisition of that software solution before evaluating, do you need to acquire something else? Now, with regards to the ease of Intune, I mean, there are benefits to be said with regards to centralized management, being able to push out baseline configurations, being able to push out vulnerability management updates, things along those lines. So Intune does do a lot, but again, there are other things that had to come into play. As an example, I made reference to your baseline configuration. You can have an image, and then you have a new laptop, and that new laptop is in 4 states away from where the system administrator is. But the moment that device connects to the infrastructure, that image is being pushed down. That's a technical component of the implementation. Who created the baseline configuration? What was the basis of why that baseline configuration was created? Are there going to be any outliers? Meaning, are there going to have to be a waiver process because somebody wants to have Visio kind of thing? Yeah. So that's where the ops being bolted on, not just after the fact, but before the fact, before you even get to the technical implementation, making sure that your ops tempo is rock solid.
Yeah, and I did want to take something out of there that you said. A lot of people, especially in our space, want to get the shiny new object, especially when it comes to I'm just gonna just throw some things out. Like you just talked about Visio. There's other chart making softwares. You can put a lot of the things you can put in your help desk through Zendesk. Use your emails. There's so many ways you can maximize use them. Even when it comes to putting your documentation away, having a chain of access. Like when you get something approved and things like that. There's so much you can use with Microsoft. So just use what you got. That's what I just want to emphasize on that.
Well, one of the things I will share with you with regards to the technology stack that I'm not going to say I've seen it a lot, but I have seen it at least 2 times where we have begun the assessment activities, and in the Teams meeting, all of a sudden, a Fireflies account pops up. It's not our Fireflies account. It belongs to the OSC. Well, wait a second. You guys using? Oh, yeah. Well, in your documentation, you say you use Teams for the communications. Well, yeah. Guys, we're just going to hit the break button right now. Well, why? Well, because you have an artificial intelligence engine that's ingesting everything to a infrastructure that you have zero control over.
And that's something I was about to hit you right up on. The AI, putting AI in these environments. You already started on it, but just keep going on that because that's a big thing.
Yeah. So there are some models. Obviously, you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. Everybody's going full force on AI. Depending on how you want to look at it, some good, some bad. So far, a lot more bad than probably some of the benefits that people are thinking it's going to bring to the table. But in instances where it is driving operational effectiveness and efficiency, again, from a business perspective, absolutely you want to try to maximize that. So there are some options to be able to use AI in a way that will allow you to still be in conformance to passing a CMMC assessment. But those are going to be extremely limited to one. Are you able to ensure that it is a on-prem or a virtual server that is within your GCC tenant, as an example, and is completely blocked and not being able to go anywhere else? Now, that would be the initial position. However, I'm very much of the opinion there is an argument that can be made as a result of recent information that came to light within the past month or so with regards to jailbreaking. Meaning that people, these are on-prem servers. They are designed not to be reaching out, and somehow, some way, not only are they getting out, they're getting out and they're wreaking havoc everywhere. So it kind of begs the question on, is it a deal breaker? No, but the guardrails that are going to have to be demonstrated to be as a lead assessor in terms of how you're minimizing the exposure are going to have to be really, really robust.
Yeah, because the only one I've used in certain environments is Copilot, but the thing is, it's cut off from the outside. It's literally it's cut off. But I do make an argument. I do think AI needs to be used, but like Claude and things like that. But I think it has to get because I know with some environments you're allowed to use if it's FedRAMP approved, if it has a certain aisle. Can you kind of elaborate on that? I just want to know how does that affect? Can you use AI?
Yeah. So again, the IL level is important, but again, if you're not able to show that it was in a contained environment that the OSC owns and fully controls, That's what's going to delineate if it's going to be a red flag or not.
Okay.
But you brought up a great point, and this kind of comes back to something I said before. And again, I'm not trying to be a poster boy for Microsoft. I'm just looking from a business perspective. But if I have leadership saying, we're going to use AI and you're going to make it happen, we want you to go spend money on Claude. Okay, but if I have Copilot in my GCC environment, why wouldn't I want to use that? Now, I'm not here again to defend, Microsoft's solution, or quite frankly, I'd be lying if I said the efficacy and capability of Claude versus Copilot. I have absolutely no idea how they compare. I think by all general metrics, Claude is beating it. But to what extent it is beating it, that would be a negative consequence to an organization wanting to use it. I just don't have enough data to be able to support that one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. And use your resources you have. Copilot works just as good. I mean, most people use AI just to, correct grammar. I definitely use it. I'm not the best grammar. I'll tell you that. I use it for understanding the Microsoft environment. So you can also create automations and things like that. Just use what you have and save money. And later on, I'm going to actually working on something to kind of show. A lot of people like to get all these compliance softwares, but hey, SharePoint can be your compliance software if you do it the right way. Just maximize that first and then go get something else. But
I agree 100%.
Yeah, Carter, I had another question. So when it comes to CMMC in general, I'm going to ask you a few. I know your time getting on, but the first, when it comes to being prepared for a CMMC assessment, do you recommend somebody having implementation, like a checklist, just so when you come to them asking certain questions, they can have it? I mean, what have you seen when it comes to proving implementation?
So any C3PO that is going to be commissioned to be able to perform the assessment for an OSC, during that phase one process, what's going to generally happen is you're going to be able to know as the OSC what are the timelines for when phase two is going to commence, and on what days what control families will be evaluated. So as an example, one of the things that we have learned is that we will never on day one have awareness and training nor personnel security. And the reason why that we've taken that approach is depending on the size of the organization, we may be required to do random sampling. So as an example, if there are 100 individuals that are going to be within the scope of the assessment, I'm going to randomly sample, let's say 17 people. On that day one of phase two, I'm going to advise the client, okay, here are the 17 individuals that are on your authorized access list that you showed us in phase one. On Thursday, make sure whomever, human resources or whomever is responsible, has all their training certificates available for us, rules of behavior or acceptable use doctrine has been signed off on by them, or whatever else, background screens, things along those lines. Because if I sat there and said on day one, all right, here are the 17 people, I'm just going to be sitting there twirling my thumbs while they're trying to find the actual artifacts versus being able to give them some time to know exactly what it is as the assessor I'm asking of them. If you, with regards to the question on a checklist, so to speak, there is publicly available what is called the Assessors Guides. And within those Assessors Guides, they are kind of like going old school here. So this is kind of going like, think of it as 80171 Cliff Notes. So you have everything is very similar to 80171 revision 2. But there's also additional things that are in there that if you're an OSC or if you're the technical person representing the OSC, oh, so this is what the assessor is going to be looking for. All right. So let me make sure that for access control, yep. Here's my list of authorized users. Here's my inventory of assets for the devices that are associated with those individuals. Here's their categorization of those assets, meaning is it a CUI asset? Is it a contractor risk managed asset? Is it a specialized asset? So on and so forth. But really kind of giving them a playbook, if you will, on what the assessors are going to be looking for and in what sequence that they will be looking for them.
Okay, got you. And so we're gonna just go. This is and then we're gonna move away from the assessment questions. And I really appreciate you. I hope whoever's listening really pay attention to what he's saying, because that's stuff you got to pay for, literally. So just to kind of go a little bit further in, I've been seeing a lot of universities. I actually saw something that the White House passed on something with CMMC and universities, because they're doing a lot of business with outside government. They're doing with China, different people, agencies, and things like that. And the government is mandating they become secure somehow. I've seen some. I saw Katie, for example. She suggested that, hey, maybe you can use CMMC for that. And then too, for me, being in a CMMC environment, I think a lot of companies should make that the standard. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? And just kind of what's your thoughts on the whole situation?
Yeah, so institutions of higher education, colleges and universities, things along those lines. Oddly enough, they have a ton of CUI. So not a lot of people would know this, but your student loan information is actually protected under a legal obligation called FERPA. And FERPA, that data is actually a data category according to NARA as CUI. So that is rampant throughout the entire educational ecosystem. However, is there anybody calling them to task to safeguard it? And no, you're correct. There's nothing, with the exception of if the institution of higher education has a contract or a grant through a U.S. government agency that, as a result of those work products, require the additional safeguarding. One of the things that we found very disappointing is that with this memo, it would be logical to conclude that a number of small, medium-sized businesses may take the position of saying, whew, I get to kick the can a little bit longer. But again, your obligations for the DFARS clauses didn't change. It's just, in your mind, albeit incorrectly, you have the opinion of, whew, I get some more breathing room before somebody has to come and certify me. But with respect to colleges and universities, we actually saw a major university in the National Capital Region pull a formal solicitation to become CMMC Level 2 certified as a direct result of that memorandum from the Department of War, which we found very, very surprising, if not shocking, to us. So, with regards to the colleges and universities, yep, very, very pervasive use. The other things that are going to be problematic is industry. I don't disagree with you. I like 800-171. I think it's enough of a building block, if you will. But the challenge that exists within, let's say, industry for the United States is you have everybody clamoring to say that you need to be in conformance with this. No, you need to be in conformance with that. No, you need to be in conformance with the other thing. Perfect case in point. SOC 2 assessments. I don't have anything against a SOC 2 assessment, but if you're not publicly traded or you're not planning on being publicly traded, there's no requirement for you to be SOC 2. None. It is something that the security industry was able to get enough critical mass on to have people thinking, yeah, this is the standard. We need to do this. And in some cases, yes, it's necessary, but for the majority of businesses, no, I would agree. You're going to be much better off either using 800-171 or maybe ISO 27001 kind of frameworks. But then the other challenge that exists, Chris, is the men and women at NIST and Gaithersburg, they came up with these guidance documents that they wanted to provide the flexibility to business owners and technical implementers to do it based on how they feel is in their best interest. And industry is very much of, no. We need you to tell us exactly how to do it. And the government's saying, we're not going to tell you exactly how to do it. So you kind of have this, butting of the heads, if you will, war of the wills, if you will, to be able to say, we're giving you the option. You've had plenty of years. Here's your blueprint on how you go about doing it. Do it, don't do it. Doesn't make a difference to us, but it's here now. And it's not just limited to the Department of War, GSA contracts, Department of Homeland Security. They now have all these 800-171 requirements that are in there. And there's also a Federal Acquisition Regulation, a FAR CUI clause that's imminently going to be codified probably before the end of the fiscal year that is going to have profound, very prolific impacts on the entire ecosystem of organizations supporting not only defense initiatives, but also federal civilian contracts as well. Oh, and Chris, you're on mute.
I appreciate you breaking that down to the extent that you did, and even mentioning that a lot of universities have CUI and referencing the different NIST documents. One of the first guests that really openly, really got into it and challenging different things when it comes to CMMC or what the norm is, it's including money. So I really appreciate you on those topics. Carter, we're getting on time. Just so we can start, we're going to slow down, but I definitely at some point, if you ever want to come back on, hey, you're welcome to it. But where can the audience find you? Where can they locate you if they want to get in contact with you, whether it's business or just want to say hello?
Yeah, no, I like to, stand true to an open door policy. Even though I'm at a vice president level, I like to engage and help organizations or individuals that are looking to be able to improve where they are. So I'm on LinkedIn by complete happenstance. Yes, there's actually another Carter Schoenberg. So there's actually two on LinkedIn. But, what are the mathematical odds on that one? But trust me, there's a big difference in age and appearances. So if you're watching me, you'll see the right one. And then also from a corporate perspective, it's the organization Cogniag that I work for, which is an Alaska Native corporation. The website is Cogniag, Koniag, cyber.com. And then in those services, you'll be able to see a variety of different things that we're doing for OT, critical infrastructure, and CMMC. And then within the CMMC portfolio, which I'm responsible for, that's a great way also of being able to reach out to me.
Yeah, make sure you check them out on LinkedIn and make sure you check out Cogniag. Based on this podcast, they really know what they're doing to get you CMMC compliant. Forgot to ask one last question.
Please.
Can you explain the value of being CMMC compliant, just so the audience can know how valuable it is and how you can market it?
Yeah, again, great question. So prior to the memo being released, so the cyber accreditation body was actually working on with a variety of different stakeholders on actually creating graphics, actual badges that these organizations that achieved level 2 could put on like their corporate websites to be able to say, hey, look at us, we have this. So in my opinion, the majority of benefit for this is ensuring that you're not going to be downlisted, or I should say kicked off of teams. Because even though the Department of War has said we are pausing, and then what's interesting is they originally said suspended, but now they've kind of changed the wording to pause on independent certifications. The large system integrators that about a year ago or even earlier this year put out memorandums to their entire team saying you had to be CMMC level 2 by a certain time or you're off the team. This memo did nothing to stop that. So they are very much of the opinion of saying, we don't care about the memo. If you want to be on the team, these are minimum table stakes. Thank you for playing. If it's not enough or if it's too overly burdensome for you, there's plenty of other organizations out there that would love to be on our team. So I would say, one, ensuring continuity of operations for your revenue with your large system integrators, and also two, being able to pre-position yourself for when this pause releases, because at some point it will release. And then when these contractual obligations are hitting the street, being able to be in a very, very unique position to be able to capitalize on that. I believe at the last count, there is roughly 1,700 companies out of 120,000 that are independently certified. So I'll leave it to your viewers to be able to do those ratios for showing what are the odds in being able to be successful with that. Now, the other thing for your viewers to take into consideration is there is also directives to contracting officers and officials that basically stated, even as far back as 2 years ago, that they can look at your SPUR score and use that as an evaluation metric for making a determination if you're going to be, a top candidate, number 2, number 3 versus somebody else. The same is now holding true for being independently certified at level 2. So there are definitely benefits to it. Also, I would argue that if you evaluate what is your total cost of investment for implementation and certification in relationship to the value of the contract acquired as a result of meeting those minimum obligations, time will tell. In some cases, maybe the ROI isn't there. Maybe you just pull all together out and just focus on commercial. But statistically speaking, more often than not, it's a mere fraction of what the total revenues earned are going to look like. And that's also another challenge that we see on the cyber side, people not being able to accurately articulate these technical matters into a business vernacular that's going to make sense to the business owner. As an example, yes, it's going to cost us this, but if you measure that in relationship to your earnings, your revenue, your free cash flow, it's not quite as big of a bite as you might think that it is versus what's the upside if we're able to win these awards as a result of those certifications. So to your last statement with regards to how else can they find me, I do a lot of speaking engagements. One of the things that I also am very proud of is I'm one of the original founders of what's called the ESP Collective. It's a not-for-profit industry organization, and we are actually going to be doing our very first inaugural conference in Detroit, Michigan in November 9th and 10th, which is really going to be one of the first conferences designed specifically for OSCs. Not that the others aren't, but the topics and the speakers that we have, and also that we're going to be doing workshops, half-day workshops for OSCs and MSPs, MSSPs, we feel is going to be a very, very compelling way for organizations to ensure that what they think they need to have happen is actually going to meet the minimum obligation when you're evaluated from an assessor's perspective.
Nah, I appreciate you, and I work in the cyberspace too, so it's like compared to the minimum you're going to pay for a CMMC assessment, compared to the money that's really on the line. I've seen it with my own eyes. Just so you can have that on your badge, put it on your company page. It's a good marketing tool. So make sure you get CMMC certified, and make sure you check out Carter and check out his company to make sure you're doing that. And when I get a chance for your free, I'm gonna get that link. I'll put it in. When this video comes out, I'll make sure I put that in to help you out, people to come to your conference. So.
Greatly appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chris.
No problem. I appreciate you. You don't understand. You're helping me too. So Carter, I want you to leave the audience with a quote. It can be a sentence, anything that you want, a statement, but leave the audience with something that's going to help them, whatever they're trying to do, whatever's on your mind. Just kind of tell me what's on the first thing that comes to your mind.
I guess I will leave everybody with this. We all have inherent biases. Those inherent biases cause us to have certain perceptions that falsely lead us to having a higher level of confidence than we generally do. I don't want to necessarily say it leads to hubris, but to quote Mike Tyson, everybody thinks that they have a plan until they're punched in the face. So don't rely on assumption, check, recheck, and when possible, use resources that are trusted to be able to validate your assumptions.
That's a bar. So make sure you listen to what he's saying. He's basically saying, hey, just be confident in what you're doing. But sometimes it could change. Trust me, there's times I go to a company, I'm like, I'm gonna do all of this. And then when I get hit in that punch in the face and I see you there, I don't know what's going on, but just try to remain composed. So that's a good quote, and I appreciate you, Carter.
Well, thank you again for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
No problem. So remember, everybody, thank you, Carter. Remember, everybody, get 1% better every day. If you're watching the podcast on YouTube, remember to like the podcast, subscribe to the channel, and then also, too, check out RMF Academy if you want to learn the basics on risk management and understanding those frameworks, documentation, EMAS, and a lot of those different software. So remember, you check it out. We do a cohort every month. And make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. So thank everybody for watching. Hope you learned a lot. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace out, everybody. And thank you.